Before I introduce today's speaker, I'll let you know about next month. Because Easter falls the first Sunday, we will be meeting on April 12th, the second Sunday. And our speaker is Michael Marchand. He's talking about Rensselaer County's role in the Civil War, both providing soldiers and war goods from all the foundries in Troy and stuff like that. So look for that on April 12th. Today, Bobbie Reno, who's the East Greenbush town historian, is here to tell us about those cannon that came from Ticonderoga and their journey to, led by, I think he was a colonel at that time, Colonel Henry Knox, all the way over to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to protect the city of Boston and threaten the British. And at the end of her program, she has a very short bit of research she's done on a particular revolutionary soldier. And so after the Knox program gets finished, there'll be a slight change of flash drive on for the visuals, and she will tell you about this soldier. He's got an interesting story. And so I will let you listen to Bobbie Reno.
Okay. Thank you all for coming out. Wow. Here. My name is Bobbie Reno, and I'm the East Greenbush town historian. I've been doing that job since 2016, so 10 years we've been doing it. And I love it. I was retired from the state. I had actually retired from the New York State Commission on Public Integrity. I always kind of that title a little bit amusing, because I always thought the public's got integrity, and stuff. But and before that, it was the Lobbying Commission, New York State Lobbying Commission, where we regulated, make sure the lobbyists, which are actually really important as our government, but we had to make sure that they were following the rules. So I retired in 2009, and short time after that, of course, I worked at I volunteered at the Bowd Art Center for about 5 years, which was a great place to be. In fact, this reminds me a little bit of it, because it was in a former church. And but then, like I said, in 2015, 2016, the town wanted to know if I wanted to be a historian. I said, okay, I will do that. So I enjoyed the job. So we're going to talk about Colonel Henry Knox, okay? And I got to make sure I'm going to work this right. And he said, turn this on like this. Oops, get my nail on here. Okay. And I should be able to turn this, and if I can move this out of the way. Okay, you can hear me all right? Okay. I have tinnitus in both ears, and I have found out when I've gone to programs, sometimes I can't hear the speaker. And if the person is just talking about what's up there on the screen, sometimes I miss it. So what I do with my programs, and with your permission I'll do it here, is I read along with you, so that people, if you have like me, have trouble hearing, hopefully you can all follow together, okay? So we're doing Henry Knox and the Noble Train of Artillery. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this.
The handouts?
That's a handout, that's coming up, the markers, it lists all the markers up to date as can be through New York State and Massachusetts, where the markers are located. So please feel free to take some if you wish. Okay, so Colonel Henry Knox and the Noble Train of Artillery. And I'm going to read along here. Henry Knox was born on July 25th, 1750 in Boston, Massachusetts. His mother's name was Mary Campbell Knox, and his father's name was William Knox. Henry was the 7th child of 10 children, a man of large frame and girth. He stood 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 250 pounds. but nonetheless was very athletic and known as a genial man. Henry's father died when Henry was young. William Knox was a shipmaster. He disappeared in the West Indies. Henry, aged 9 at the time, had to quit school and go to work to help support the family. Because of this, Henry, sorry, I'm not used to, I'm used to reading along with it, I apologize. You want to, that would help, thank you. Okay. William Knox was a shipmaster. He disappeared in the West Indies. Henry, aged 9 at the time, had to quit school and go to work to help support the family. Because of this, Henry was primarily a self-taught man. First, he clerked at a bookstore where he learned about selling books. He eventually opened his own bookstore on Cornhill Street, and that's a picture of the building, fairly recent today, and a sign that he hung out in front. If you notice, the name of the bookstore is small print, but his name is in big print there. In 1772, Henry Knox became a member of the Boston Grenadier Corps, a local militia group resisting British authority. At this time, Knox suffered a hunting accident that caused him to lose the third and fourth fingers of his left hand, which he hid from public view by a handkerchief. Henry Knox fell in love with and married on June 23, 1774, the daughter of a prominent Boston Tory. Now, I have to make sure I pronounce this name correctly. Thomas Flucker, named Lucy Flucker, whom Henry called my charmer. Henry's patriotism did not deter Lucy's love. Her father arranged for Henry to be commissioned in the British Army. Henry declined. After the violence at Lexington and Concord, Henry and Lucy fled Boston to Worcester, Massachusetts. Lucy never saw her parents again, with them having fled to England. And there's the pictures of her. Okay, oops, sorry. the attractive woman. Okay. The British occupied the city of Boston. A local resistant militia had ringed the city in the hills surrounding Boston. Militias contained the British to Boston on April 19, 1775, following the battles of Lexington and Concord. Freeing Boston of British control was an early priority in the war, as it was a critical port and ideological American stronghold. However, Americans faced early defeat, attempting to advance toward the city in the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775. Understanding the need for more competent military leadership, the Continental Congress elected Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, and he was bound for Boston to continue the siege. Quickly, Washington was charged with forming military companies into an army and directing the siege of Boston. Knowing that he would be away for many months, Washington wrote to his wife, Martha Washington, "I shall feel no pain from the toil or danger of the campaign," he confessed. With the future of the Revolution uncertain, Washington worried that Virginia's Governor Lord Dunmore would attack Mount Vernon and even imprison his wife while he was fortified outside Boston. And the photograph shows Lord Dunmore. He was the governor of New York in 1770, and then the governor of Virginia, 1771 to 1775. As the end of summer approached, the American army was in decline, suffering of losses from disease, desertions, and other absences was alarming to General Washington. By the end of September, Washington planned a bold move to end the occupation of Boston. However, following instructions by Congress, he was to make no move without advice and consent of his generals. After meeting with the generals, it was unanimously agreed an attack at present was too hazardous. Upon arriving in Cambridge in early July, Washington proposed an attack on Boston. However, his officers were against it, as the British were still receiving supplies by sea. They urged Washington to wait until the waters around Boston were frozen. Then, as winter approached, came Colonel Henry Knox and his plan to get the cannon from the abandoned Fort Ticonderoga. The winter of 1776 in Boston was brutal. The British soldiers occupying the city dealt with tents shattered by storms. Some soldiers froze to death. Food was scarce. Scurvy and smallpox raged. But the American soldiers suffered too. They were underpaid, tired, and had little supplies and clothing to keep warm. Reinforcements were slow in coming. To the British, the American soldiers were simply rebels, or just country people, or most importantly, not an army. They were nothing more than rabble. The British may have been partly right. However, the British officers, nicknamed the Redcoat Gentry, were experiencing much more pleasant conditions, with evening entertainment such as plays, grand balls, fine dinners, and assemblies accompanied by loyalists and their wives. They had it easy. This I found in research, I found this a bit amusing. The tensions were mounting among American soldiers, and General Washington's frustrations reached a boiling point. In Harvard Yard, a snowball fight broke out between Virginia riflemen and sailors from the Marblehead Regiment. Soon the fight turned into a brawl, with biting, gouging, and knockdown, and with the brawl swelling to more than 1,000 men. I find that a little bit, maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but look at the source. Into the fray rode General Washington. Leaping from his horse, he grabbed two brawny, combative men by the throat, shaking them fiercely. All the men, seeing this, began fleeing in all directions, scattering to and fro. Can you just picture this? This story was told by Israel Trask, who was 10 years old at the time and had enlisted with his father. To the young Trask, General Washington seemed almost supernatural. I questioned whether this was real, but the source was David McCullough. And I have to respect David McCullough. And this is a depiction of the snowball fight with General Washington on his horse. But Israel Trask wrote on his pension application, "I only saw him and his colored servant both mounted with the spring of a deer. He leapt from his saddle, threw the reins of his bridle into the hands of his servant, and rushed into the thickest of the melee with an iron grip, seized two tall, brawny, athletic, savage-looking riflemen by the throat, keeping them at arm's length, alternately shaking and talking to them." In this position, the eye of the belligerents caught sight of the general. Its effect on them was instantaneous flight at the top of their speed in all directions from the scene of the conflict. Less than 15 minutes time had elapsed from the commencement of the row before the general and his two criminals were the only occupants of the field of action. So I guess it did happen, but maybe a bit embellished, but I think it did happen. Colonel Knox devised a plan to get the needed artillery. He knew the abandoned Fort Ticonderoga had cannon that was left there after Ethan Allen's Green Mountain Boys, along with Benedict Arnold and his troops, forced the British to flee the fort in May 1775. Colonel Knox's plan was to bring the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston. And this is the journey. If you click it again, the arrows will go down the path. Going down from Fort Ticonderoga, all the way down past us, through Albany. You gotta go right into Cambridge. Right across to Cambridge. Thank you. To General Washington, this plan seemed foolish, dangerous, almost impossible, but cannon were needed. On November 16, 1775, he gave Colonel Knox written orders to go and get the cannon. The first snow having fallen on November 21st, accompanied by bitter winds. Winter was coming fast. And that's a picture of Fort Ticonderoga back then. Have many of you been to Fort Ticonderoga to visit? It's a great, great place. Colonel Knox gathered his men under his command and marched from Boston to Fort Ticonderoga. Upon arriving at Fort Ticonderoga on December 5th, Colonel Knox and his men built boats using some of the allotted $1,000, a lot then, he was given to spend to sail 59 cannon down Lake George before the lake froze. Sailing the lake was not easy. The trek to Boston began on December 9, 1775. The illustration shows one of the boats stuck on a rock there. He wrote to Lucy, "Don't be afraid. There is no fighting in this assignment. I am upon business only." The passage down Lake George took 8 days. Then they switched to sleighs, and the oxen obtained from local patriots. 42 sleighs weighing 5,400 pounds were built. 80 yoke of oxen to pull them, but there wasn't much snow to pull the sleighs. It was all mud. It finally snowed, but still the journey was very difficult. On January 5th, 1776, the Caravan arrived at Albany, New York, then moving through Greenbush, Schodack, down to Kinderhook, left to Great Barrington, Massachusetts, onward to Boston. You click at the blue arrows. That's a little clearer map than the other one. "We shall cut no small figure through the country with our cannon," Henry wrote to Lucy. I could imagine what this looked like. And I did. I wondered why the British didn't see the large caravan of cannons moving down through the Hudson Valley from Ticonderoga and across the Berkshires of Massachusetts. And after putting together information from several sources, the answer is, 1, the route the caravan took was not a direct route the British took from Canada to Boston. 2, the British were preoccupied with the siege of Boston and did not have the resources to intercept the cannon. And 3, I think the most important, the British did not consider any military force would be moving over and through the Berkshires in this difficult terrain of the Berkshires in winter. That makes more sense to me. At Fort George, the caravan was held up by a cruel thaw, making ice too thin to cross the Hudson River. Then, 3 feet of snow came on Christmas Day. They pushed towards Albany with horses, replacing the oxen. Crossing the Hudson River at Albany, one sled broke through the ice. Owing to the assistance of the good people of Albany, the sled and cannon were recovered. Along the way, news of the advancing cannon caravan spread among the people, who turned out in increasing numbers along the route to view for themselves this amazing feat. On January 27, 1776, the noble train of cannon arrived in Cambridge with a courier reporting to General Washington, "Knox is here, and he has cannon." The journey took approximately 6 weeks. And take note of this, the illustration, because that's going to be part of the little program I do after this. Okay, this is where I need some help with pronunciation. Okay, the black poet, Phyllis Wheatley, sent General Washington a poem. "Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side. By every action, let the goddess guide." General Washington, not known to favor poetry, wrote a letter of reply to Phyllis Wheatley in his own hand. "I thank you most sincerely for your polite notice of me, and however undeserving I may be of such encomium," high praise, and panegyric, a verse written in high praise. "The style and manner exhibit a striking proof of your great poetical talents." I found pretty cool. That's pretty cool. The night of March 4th, 1776, the American soldiers set the cannons up on the hills surrounding the British in Boston. The plan was to set up the cannons on the heights of Dorchester in one night. 3,000 men under General Thomas took part with 2,000 Massachusetts regulars to set up the cannon. General Washington wrote to a friend, "Bring on a rumpus." On March 2nd, the cannonading began. On March 4th, the cannons on both sides were roaring. The next morning, British General Howe saw the American cannons. He remarked, "The Americans did more in one night than my whole army would have done in 1 month." One of the London newspapers published a letter from an unnamed officer of distinction who was present in Boston. 5th March. This is, I believe, likely to prove as important a day to the British Empire as any in our annals. We underwent last night to a very severe cannonade, which damaged a number of houses and killed some men. This morning at daybreak we discovered 2 redoubts on the hills of Dorchester Point and 2 smaller works on their flanks. They were all raised during the night, with the expedition equal to that of the genie belonging to Aladdin's wonderful lamp. From these hills they command the whole town, so that we must drive them from their post or desert the place. On March 17th, 1776, known as Evacuation Day, the British began evacuating Boston to their ships. Thanks to Colonel Henry Knox, the Americans reclaimed the city of Boston. Yes. After the war, on March 22nd, 1782, Colonel Henry Knox was promoted to Major General, the youngest man ever promoted to this rank at the time. When the British withdrew the last of their troops from New York on November 21st, 1783, Knox was at the head of the American forces that took over. He stood next to Washington during the latter's farewell address on December 4th at Fraunces Tavern. After Washington resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief on December 23rd, Knox became senior officer of the Army. That year, Henry Knox became the Secretary of War in President George Washington's cabinet, succeeding Benjamin Lincoln, who resigned. He was officially appointed to Congress on March the 8th, 1785. The Society of the Cincinnati. Have you ever heard of them? I didn't know about them until I started researching Henry Knox. They still exist today. In 1783, Henry Knox initiated the Society of the Cincinnati in Fishkill, New York, named after Roman consul Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus, who was called to save Rome from invaders. After the war, he returned to his farm. This is the Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus. After the war, he returned to his farm rather than seizing power. George Washington was likened to Cincinnatus. Its goals were to preserve the rights dearly won, to promote the continuing union of the states, and to assist members in need, their widows and their orphans. George Washington was the organization's first president. Benjamin Franklin criticized the organization. I only wonder that when the united wisdom of our nation had, and the Articles of Confederation, manifested their dislike of establishing ranks of nobility by birth, by authority either of the Congress or of any particular state, a number of private persons should think proper to distinguish themselves and their posterity from their fellow citizens, and form an order of hereditary knights in the direct opposition to the solemnly declared sense of their country. I guess Ben Franklin didn't like them at all. This organization exists today. It is a fraternal hereditary membership, and there's an associate organization, the Daughters of the Cincinnati. On January 2nd, 1795, Knox retired to his home in Thomaston, Maine. Henry Knox died October 25th, 1806, at the age of 56, of infection from a chicken bone lodged in his digestive tract. That was his residence. Okay. This is their grave, Henry and Lucy's graves, Colonel Henry and Lucy Knox's gravesite, Thomaston Village Cemetery, Maine. Now to the markers. The marker to Colonel Henry Knox of the Caravan in front of the Greenbush Reformed Church, corner of Hayes Road, Columbia Turnpike and Hayes Road. And it's very hard to read it. Okay, and I think I've got it right here. Yeah. And it says, through this place passed Colonel Henry Knox in the winter of 1775 to 1776. To deliver to General George Washington at Cambridge the train of artillery from Fort Ticonderoga used to force the British Army to evacuate Boston, erected by the state of New York during the sesquicentennial of the American Revolution, 1926. And it comes to the end, but, little footnote, did you know? During the American Revolutionary War, the country was referred to as the United Colonies. On September 9, 1776, the Second Continental Congress officially named the country the United States of America. And that's the end of Henry. And we'll get to the next program. The next program I found when I was researching Henry, and I just went down this rabbit hole with this, and I'm kind of glad I did. There is a connection, not local, of this person with Knox and the Caravan, but there is a connection to it. It's the story of Cup Ashford. There he is. Thank you. Okay, this is the illustrations of Cup, of course, are an artist's imagination. There's no photographs of them. Okay, this is the story of Cup Ashford. Okay. Cup Mitchell was born in June of 1746. Who his parents were is unknown at this stage. Cuff lived in Bridgewater, Massachusetts as the slave of Nathan Mitchell. Nathan Mitchell Sr.'s son, Nathan Mitchell Jr., stated Cuff came to his father's ownership when he, the son, was 3 years old. In the affidavit of Nathan Mitchell Jr., he states that he came to my father's when I was 3 years old and continued 9 years at the expectation of which time he bought his freedom, which was in the month of March 1017 and 75. This is the muster roll for the 10 companies of the 34th Regiment of Foot in the service of the United States, 1775. There are 5 black soldiers listed on this muster roll, including Cuff. Of note is that they were not segregated from the white soldiers in separate companies. The blue circle is Cuff's name on the roll. It's Cuff Mitchell. In the spring of 1775, Cuff Ashford enlisted as Cuff Mitchell in the Continental Army, buying his freedom, serving in Captain Hayden's company in Roxbury for about 10 months. The Battle of Bunker Hill erupted while Cuff was stationed at Roxbury. The soldiers reported seeing gun smoke rise from Breed's Hill. American painter John Turnbull described the battle thus: the roar of artillery fired at bursting of shells whose track, like that of a comet, was marked on the dark night sky by a long train of lights in the burning fuse. The blazing ruins of the town formed altogether a sublime scene of military magnificence and ruin. That night was a fearful breaking in for young soldiers who were there for the first time, were seeking repose on the summit of a bare rock surrounded by such a scene. That's from the painting of John Turnbull. Now, Cuff Ashford's connection to the noble train of artillery. As we learned, on November 16, 1775, General Washington approved Colonel Harry Knox's proposal to recover abandoned cannons from Fort Ticonderoga and transport them to British-held Boston. Oops. In March of 1776, under Colonel Knox, the men enlisted in the Continental Army assisted in reassembling the cannon and placing the cannon around the hills circling the city of Boston. Cuff Ashford was one of the enlisted men. The red arrow points to a black man in the painting. Could this be Cuff Ashford? We should move the arrow move. No, the arrow move. Okay. I'm not sure that's Cuff, but he's the only black person in that painting there, so maybe it is Cuff. Maybe it is. I like to think it is. Okay. Cuff Ashford. Cuff, I found out, he was sort of like the Forrest Gump. I mean, he was everywhere in the Revolution. He kept re-enlisting, and he wound up everywhere. Cuff Ashford went on to serve in Captain James Allen's company in New York for several months. Re-enlisting for another 6 months, he marched from Springfield, Massachusetts to West Point. He was present at the execution of Major John Andre. Major Andre was a British Army officer assisting Benedict Arnold's attempted surrender of the fort at West Point to the British. That's another story with Major Andre. Cuff Ashford re-enlisted a final time and served 3 months in Rhode Island in Captain Elisha Mitchell's company. Not related to him, of course. On February 6, 1772, Cuff married Elizabeth Lydia Quay. Lydia was described in the Bridgewater marriage records as a mulatto girl, brought up enslaved by Anthony Winslow. The marriage ceremony was performed by the Honorable Samuel Angier, I think it's pronounced Angier. Cuff and Lydia had 4 children: Jane Ashport, Luther Ashport, Calvin Ashport, and Rebecca Ashport. Lydia died in October of 1842. Cuff died on August 31st, 1827, at the age of 81. He was described in the racial terms of the time as an honest and faithful black. Calvin died on March 4th, at 1826, at the age of 35 of influenza. Luther died suddenly May 11th, 1826, at age 39. Rebecca died July 12th, 1825, at age 30. Jane died August 23rd, 1823, at age 37. Cuff lived longer than any of his children. Cuff Ashport and his family are buried in the First Cemetery in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. They are the only African Americans buried there, and this is Cuff's grave. After Cuff died, Lydia had to prove Cuff Mitchell and Cuff Ashport were the same man to collect his pension. She was successful. That's a copy I got from the National Archives. Cuff Ashport, you were a fine soldier in service to what was to be the United States of America, and a fine man. Cuff's great-great-grandson, Lemuel Ashport, served in the American Civil War in the famous 54th Massachusetts Regiment, commanded by Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. Most of the 54th Regiment were killed in the battle at Fort Wagner, South Carolina. Lemuel survived, and in 1881 became the first black police officer in Brockton, Massachusetts. That's the end of it. That's it. Any questions? Okay, well, yes.
How did he get the 2 different last names? Did you ever?
I don't know. I tend to think, of course, with Muhammad Ali, he was Cassius Clay. He said he didn't want a slave name. He wanted his own name. It could have been something like that, where that was his slave name, Mitchell, because that was the name of his owner. And I think what the name Ashport meant to him, I don't know. We probably will never know anything. I think it was a personal decision to recognize and claim his freedom. That's what I think it was. Gotta talk loud.
You cited that a cannon was dropped in the Hudson and retrieved. Was there any record of any cannon being lost in the Mohawk River?
No, I don't think they crossed the Mohawk at all. No, just came down. They came down from Lake George and then right into the Hudson through that. That was too far west, I think, on that.
It may still be there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much.